He was born in 1881 in the city of Salonika, then a part of the Ottoman Empire, a city of mixed faiths, shifting borders, and deep contradictions. The boy was named Mustafa. Later, teachers would add the word Kemal, meaning perfection, because of his sharp mind. No one then could have imagined that he would one day dismantle the very empire he was born into and replace it with something entirely new. Mustafa Kemal grew up during a time when the Ottoman Empire was visibly decaying. Once rulers of vast lands stretching across 3 continents, the Ottomans by the late 19th century had become known as the sick man of Europe. Corruption ran deep. Nationalist movements chipped away at imperial control. Foreign powers circled like vultures. Inside, there was chaos. Outside, there was pressure. The old ways were failing, and many young men of his generation knew it. Kemal was sent to military school. There, his ideas began to form. Ideas about nationalism, secularism, discipline, and power. He admired the efficiency of the West, but not its domination. He believed in modernity, but not submission. As a young officer, he served in Syria, Libya, and the Balkans, proving himself not only brave, but intellectually ahead of his time. He kept his views close to his chest, but those who served with him noted his intensity. He was not like the others. When World War I broke out, the Ottoman Empire, desperate to prove its relevance, allied with Germany. It was a fatal decision. The empire was dragged into a war it could not win. But in the chaos, Mustafa Kemal rose. In 1915, at Gallipoli, he became a legend. With calm command and unshakable will, he led Ottoman forces to one of their few major victories in the war, repelling the Allied invasion and turning what should have been a swift defeat into a grueling campaign. His orders were simple, brutal, and effective. I do not order you to attack. I order you to die. The soldiers obeyed, and many did die, but the line held. The name Mustafa Kemal became known across the empire and beyond it. But victory at Gallipoli could not stop what came next. By 1918, the Ottoman Empire was collapsing. Istanbul was occupied by British, French, and Italian troops. The once mighty caliphate, spiritual heart of the Islamic world, was being carved apart by European hands. The Sultan, powerless and isolated, signed treaties that gave away Turkish lands. It was humiliation, written in ink. That was when Mustafa Kemal broke with the empire, and with history. He traveled to the heart of Anatolia, far from the occupied capital, and began building a resistance. It wasn't just a rebellion, it was a revolution in slow motion. He rejected the Sultan's authority. He rejected the treaty of which would have divided Turkey among foreign powers. And he began to gather support from former officers, from nationalists, from farmers, students, merchants, people tired of watching their homeland reduced to scraps. He promised not just freedom from occupation, but rebirth. Not just survival, but reinvention. The War of Independence was brutal, chaotic, and uncertain. But Mustafa Kemal emerged from it not only victorious, but untouchable. By 1923, the foreign powers withdrew. The Ottoman Sultan was sent into exile. And in October of that year, Mustafa Kemal declared the birth of a new republic. It would not be Ottoman, would not be religious, it would be Turkish. And it would be secular. The world watched, uncertain, intrigued, and in some corners, deeply alarmed, because Mustafa Kemal was not finished. He had broken the old empire. Now he would break the old ways. The Ottoman Empire was gone. The caliphate abolished. The Sultan exiled. And standing at the center of the wreckage was one man, Mustafa Kemal, now called Atatürk, meaning father of the Turks. He didn't ask for that name. The Grand National Assembly gave it to him by law. It was more than a title. 'Twas a message. This was his republic now, and he would shape it in his image. Atatürk believed that for Turkey to survive, it had to change, completely and without hesitation. The empire had fallen, he argued, because it clung to the past, because it let superstition rule over science, tradition over progress, religion over reason. So he set out to dismantle centuries of Ottoman and Islamic influence in public life. Not quietly, not gradually, but with radical speed. He replaced Islamic law with a civil code modeled on Switzerland's. Out went the Sharia courts. In came secular courts. He banned the fez, a symbol of Ottoman identity, calling it backward. He replaced the Arabic script with Latin letters, claiming it would boost literacy and modernize communication. Overnight, street signs changed. Textbooks were rewritten. Teachers retrained. For millions, it was as if the written word had suddenly become a foreign language. Women, who had been largely absent from public life under the Ottomans, were given rights. To vote, to divorce, to study, to work. Polygamy was outlawed. Secular schools replaced religious ones. The call to prayer, once in Arabic, was required to be recited in Turkish. Even the calendar was changed. The Islamic lunar calendar was scrapped in favor of the Gregorian one. Friday, the holy day in Islam, was no longer the day of rest. Sunday was Europe had not only arrived, it had been legislated. The old guard was stunned. The traditional elite, religious scholars, Ottoman loyalists, Islamic jurists were pushed aside. Their institutions dismantled. Their influence erased. Ataturk did not negotiate with them. He believed compromise had been the Ottoman disease. The state would be secular, or it would not be at all. But resistance did come. In mosques, in madrasas, in whispers across the countryside, the question grew louder. Had Ataturk gone too far? For centuries, the Sultan had been not just a king, but a caliph, the spiritual leader of Sunni Islam. Now, there was no caliph, no Sharia, no empire. For conservative Muslims, it felt like betrayal, like desecration. Uprisings flared. Notably, the Sheikh-led rebellion in 1925. Led by Kurdish and religious forces who wanted the return of Islamic law and the caliphate. Ataturk crushed it brutally. He declared martial law. He closed texts and dervish lodges, centuries-old centers of Islamic teaching and mysticism. He banned religious orders. Public displays of religious leadership were tightly monitored or outlawed. Islamic scholars, stripped of power, issued their condemnations. Some accused Ataturk of apostasy. Others fled the country. But they were silenced, often through courts, censorship, and exile. Ataturk controlled the press, the schools, and the army. He didn't just win the war. He shaped the memory of it. In textbooks, his reforms were framed as liberation from darkness. His opponents were labeled as enemies of progress. And yet, the public reaction was complex. Many urban Turks, especially in Istanbul and Ankara, embraced the reforms. They saw them as a bridge to Europe, to science, to respect on the world stage. Others obeyed out of fear or exhaustion. Some adapted. Others resisted silently, holding on to the Quran in their homes, reciting prayers in Arabic behind closed doors, teaching their children the faith in secret. Ataturk did not hate religion. He was raised Muslim, but he believed religion had no place in the affairs of a modern state. His vision was not anti-Islam, it was post-Islamic governance. A nation where a Turk's identity came not from the mosque, but from the republic. Not from divine right, but from civic duty. But such rapid change had a cost. A spiritual vacuum opened. The traditions that once gave people structure and meaning were gone, and nothing came fast enough to replace them. For some, modernity felt cold, empty, foreign. The call to prayer may have changed languages, but its echo no longer reached every heart. When Mustafa Kemal Atatürk died in 1938, the nation paused. Not just in silence, but in uncertainty. Turkey had never truly existed without him. He was not merely its founder. He was its architect, its voice, its unrelenting engine of reform. For 16 years, he had ruled like a commander of both state and spirit. And when his heart finally gave out, at the age of 57, even his critics felt the tremor. But the revolution he began did not die with him. His successors, members of the single-party Republican People's Party, continued his secular project with near-religious intensity. They called it Kemalism, a doctrine of nationalism, secularism, statism, and reformism. It became the blueprint for modern Turkey. But while the structure stood strong on paper, its foundations were restless. The people Ataturk had dragged into modernity were still adjusting. In cities, his reforms had created a new Turkish identity: educated, Western-facing, cosmopolitan. But in villages, especially across Anatolia and the Kurdish East, the memory of empire, of religion, of the old ways had not faded. The divide between secularism and Islam was not just ideological, it was geographic, it was generational, and it was emotional. For decades, the Turkish state imposed secularism not as a choice, but as a law. The military, inheriting Ataturk's mantle as guardian of the republic, saw itself as the last line of defense against religious influence. Islamic political parties were banned. Religious education was limited. Women were forbidden to wear headscarves in universities or government jobs. The Quran was read quietly, reverently, but not publicly. Turkey was modern, but the price of that modernity was control. And yet, faith endured. The mosque never truly disappeared. Neither did the longing for a more spiritual public life. And over time, a quiet rebellion began to stir. Not through violence, but through memory, through identity, through elections. By the 1950s, multi-party democracy returned, and with it, the rise of conservative voices. Parties that respected Islamic traditions began to win seats. The Turkish people, at least many of them, were not rejecting Ataturk, but they were redefining what it meant to be modern. Could one be both religious and republican? Could Islam find its place again in Turkish life without returning to empire? The struggle became generational. One Turkey wore suits and spoke French. The other wore headscarves and recited verses. And between them, the legacy of Ataturk hovered. Revered by many, questioned by others, never forgotten. In the late 20th and early 21st century, new leaders emerged who challenged the boundaries of secularism. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, once imprisoned for reciting a religious poem, rose to power, promising economic reform and cultural recognition for conservative Muslims. Under his leadership, the headscarf ban was lifted. Religious schools expanded. The call to prayer returned to Arabic. And in 2020, Istanbul's Hagia Sophia, a museum since Ataturk's time, was reconverted into a mosque. To some, this was justice. To others, it was a reversal of the republic's soul. The secular-religious divide had become the defining tension of modern Turkey, a nation torn between its founder's vision and its people's evolving identity. But Ataturk's legacy is not so easily erased. His face remains on the currency. His words carved into mountains. His mausoleum in Ankara and Kabir draws millions each year. Children still memorize his speeches. Soldiers still salute his ideals. For many, he remains the father of the nation, flawed, forceful, unforgettable. What he created was not just a country, but a conversation that has never ended, between past and future, between belief and progress, between the soul of a people and the shape of their state. And perhaps that is the real legacy of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Not just the reforms, not just the republic, but the courage and the cost of building something entirely new.